Okay, welcome to the Courage to Live podcast. I'm Josh Bitsko. I'm joined with my wife Jenna, and in this podcast, we're going to talk about honestly the things that we don't talk about a lot. And I was a police officer for 23 years in Las Vegas and had a lot of experiences. I've been in rooms I didn't want to be. I've been in numerous critical incidents, and through those experiences, we're going to talk about basically how to continue to have the courage to live. And it's not always easy, but with us together, both of our experiences, both in law enforcement and life, I think that we can provide a lot of value to our listeners. Jenna, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your experience.
Yeah. So my name's Jenna Bitsko. I was in law enforcement for 14 years. As a civilian, I was a analytical manager for 3 and then a crime analyst before that for 11. So I am here to kind of keep the conversation going and dig a little deeper than Josh may want to sometimes, but we'll make sure that we provide something that everybody finds value in.
Yeah, and I think it's important that, we are going to laugh, but we're also going to talk about some heavy things too. And as you always do, you're good at pulling more value out of what I talk about and asking the questions that I think people want to ask that sometimes I don't think about as well, and provide your point of view to things too. So I did, as I said earlier, 24 years in law enforcement in Las Vegas, and I had a lot of different jobs. I was a canine handler for a long time, and that's honestly what I loved and what I did the most of. But I had a variety of other jobs too, internal affairs. I was a detective for a while, patrol, and patrol really is that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in uniform. I wanted to be out chasing bad guys. And K9 afforded me that opportunity to really just go on the most fun calls and the most critical incidents. But one of the things through some of my experiences, and one of the big ones I'm going to talk about today, the Route 91 mass shooting in Las Vegas, where 58 people were killed, over 455 people were shot or hit with frag, and over 800 injuries. Obviously, that changed who I am. But at the same time, those experiences and how I handled it or didn't handle it at times has given me a unique insight on not just what police officers and first responders go through, but honestly just in life. And I think that's one of the things that I realized in going through these critical incidents is a lot of what we deal with, yes, in policing can be unique, but it all applies to life. And having the ability to form deeper connections with people or not. Like for me, when some of the things that I've been through, I went inside, I went internal, and I didn't really um, form relationships or talk to people. I was just kind of numb, and I think that because of how I handle that, I think a lot of people deal with that. You don't just have to be in law enforcement or deal with trauma at that level to be affected by the things that we go through.
So, overall theme of this podcast, it's going to be a little bit policing. It's going to be some humor, some stories. Obviously, Josh talking about his experience not only with the Route 91 festival shooting and his role in that, but also other critical incidents that he was on that kind of then led to us forming a business where he goes around the country and not only talks about those experiences, but also talks about his PTSD and how he's learned to deal with that through therapy, through EMDR. But then we also want to make this podcast more universal. So how do these experiences translate to real life? They do. They translate to business, they translate to marriage, they translate to your relationship with your kids and coworkers and everything else. So this podcast isn't just about policing, it's going to be more universal than that. And also talking about humor in life and also some inspiration along the way. Josh is almost done writing a book, and
Mm.
we'll do a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
But maybe we can just start at the beginning. How did you get involved in policing, and kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's when what you just talked about, and I'm going to talk about some things that I did that were really scary. But honestly, one of the most scary things that I've done, and I know you too, is starting a business, right? And stepping out on that skinny branch and trying to figure all of that out after both of us had such long careers in law enforcement and in civil service. So we are going to weave a lot of that in there too, because we've learned a lot of lessons. We're still learning on how to operate a business and how to do these things. But I think that through humor, through stories, we can provide a lot of value for our listeners and even ourselves to have these conversations together.
Sure.
But yeah, so I got all I ever wanted to be was a cop. Like my dad was a he was a police officer for 30 years in Las Vegas. He retired in 2005, but I remember being like 5 years old. He was an academy tax sergeant, and I remember running through the academy wearing his cover, his hat, and hitting things with his baton because I thought it was cool. And it's all I ever wanted to be. And he had other plans for me. He's like, you should be a lawyer or a doctor or something all parents want their kids to be. And all I ever wanted to be was a cop. So everything I did as a kid in life, up until turning 18 when I could test, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but it was all geared towards being a police officer. In high school, and all of my friends were smoking weed, I never did because I knew that at the time it was a felony here in Las Vegas, but I also knew that that would prohibit me from testing for being a police officer or a cadet. And so every decision I made was geared towards that. And so when I was 18, Las Vegas, they had a program called the cadet program. And you can hire on the police department. At the time was a well-paying job for 18, full-time job. I had insurance and benefits. But basically what you do is you take reports, um, and you help officers with like the administrative stuff, but you're in a uniform, you have your own car, you're driving around. And when I tested, they only had 5 positions for 200 people that tested. So I was really nervous. I remember, I was still in high school when I took the test. So I had to miss a day of school to go take the test. Super nervous, and, ended up taking it and making the list. So there was 5 of us in our academy, all 18, no idea what we were doing in life or anything other than we wanted to be cops. And it's funny, some of the people in that initial cadet class, like Darius, who you worked in internal affairs, I knew the rest of my career. But the cool thing about the program is when you turned 21, you didn't have to test for police officer again. You could just go right into the academy. So you still had to do another academy. But I just had this like thirst for knowledge even as a cadet. I had always had a skill set for languages, so I signed up to be a Spanish translator, which, because as a cadet you don't have any suspect contact. You're not supposed to go on domestic violences or anything like this unless you speak Spanish. And I found that loophole. I studied. I was taking college classes at the time, so I was taking Spanish classes, and I signed up to be a translator. And so then I was going on the calls I normally wouldn't. Even I remember translating voluntary statements on a homicide for our homicide section at 19, sitting there going through it, explaining to them what their statement said, and learning all of that. But it's all I ever wanted to do. And
Well, and at 18, then even though you're translating, you're also dealing with some very adult problems and traumas that you yourself probably had never experienced up until that point, right?
yeah, no, not at all. I lived a very sheltered childhood. I went to my high school was actually called Basic High School, so it's kind of basic for those that live in Las Vegas know what I'm talking about. Grew up in Henderson, played sports, but really just again, all my goal was aimed towards being a police officer. And but yeah, I saw my first dead body in field training at 18, and it was a gentleman who had hung himself in a shed in his backyard in the middle of summer. So it
Was
wasn't,
that shocking,
it was,
seeing that
yeah.
for the first time?
Well, because, you see on TV and movies, it's an actor with their eyes shut laying down. This body didn't look like that. It had been in, 100 degree heat. I'm not going to get into all the like specifics, but let's just say it was, yes, very shocking for an 18-year-old to go and see that. Um, and
Well, and had the police department equipped you at that point for being 18 and jumping right into seeing dead bodies and going on domestic violence and homicide and all of these things that you dealt with at 18, was there any kind of preparation for what you were going to see or experience?
it was basically the Wild West in policing, and this was the 2000.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I remember because I was in the car with my field training officer who wasn't overly happy to be training a cadet because he was a police officer, but he had to go take report calls all day. And he heard the dead body call, and this was like my first couple days. He's like, "Hey, we're going to go to that, get you the experience of seeing a dead body."
Mm-hmm.
But and I was like, okay, like I can't say no. And I did, honestly at the time there's that morbidity. Like I didn't want to say no. I wanted to see it. But there's always this, especially your first couple when you're around one of those a dead body like that. It's like you're thinking, oh, is it going to jump up at me? Like, is this person really deceased? And this person really was. But no, there was no like afterwards we went to lunch. Like it was, and my FTO didn't talk about it. He was mainly more to like he wanted to train me and give me the experience, but also to see if I could handle it.
Right.
Like make sure I didn't run out and throw up in the crime scene or break down crying or something like that. And there was a lot of that, a lot of tests with traumatic things early on. And that were things that were mirrored. Even I made that mistake as a field training officer of, you hear the calls when when I was an actual FTO, you'd hear the call that you want to get your training experience for, but I wasn't also, hey, let's talk about that. How did that, make you feel? Are you okay after that?
That wasn't, it's starting to be the culture in policing a little bit now. I don't know about officers in training, but those conversations are being had more often. But at the time, those conversations were not had at all, right?
No, not at all. In fact, if you did talk about those things, you were seen as weak. Um, I remember asking my dad when I was getting on the police department, like, hey, were you ever like scared? And he's like, no, my hands would shake a little when I'd smoke a cigarette after a call, but that was about it. He was a cop in like the 70s and 80s, and they used to smoke in briefing rooms and fight in parking lots. That was a different culture than I experienced.
That was the real Wild West.
That was the Wild West. And he used to tell stories of his training officers and some of the things that he saw. Because when he went to the academy, or when he first became a police officer, you didn't go to the academy. You hit the streets until an academy happened. So he was put with the field training officer. He said like a similar story, a little different in that they go out on to stop somebody. The guy takes off running. His training officer pulls out his revolver, fires 2 rounds in the air, and says, "The next one's in your back." And the guy gave up.
Yeah.
Like, so a little different than maybe seeing a dead body, but I guess the same theme of
Still, conversations were not being had
no,
to
no.
prepare anyone.
And it wasn't until later in life, after he had retired and we were fishing, and he said, actually, there were times that I was scared, and he would even talk about calls that bothered him. But for him, I mean, growing up as a cop in the 70s and 80s, like he didn't talk about anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was me like prodding him and talking about those things when I had been a cop for, 10 years at this point, and me telling him stories about, some of the things that I'd seen that bothered me. Then he was able to do the same thing. And, you know, it's kind of one of the themes when I go teach and I talk to other cops. And I didn't know that I would be doing this at that point in my life is, giving somebody else permission to feel like
Mm-hmm.
we all in this industry as cops and as men just in life, you can give somebody else permission to feel and to express what they're going to feel. And I think we can do a better job as that as cops, as first responders, and honestly as men. I have plenty of friends that aren't cops, and we'll go, to dinner or go have a drink and start having conversations. And it's not until I start talking about things that are like real and vulnerable than they do, and
Right.
I'll give them permission. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it's something you did with me, even when we were friends. Like you had the ability to get me to open up about things that I generally hadn't in life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the cadet for me, not compared to, firing warning shots, which are clearly against policy now, for probably because of that guy, who knows, that cop. Um, but, it was through all of those experiences and that I was able to kind of learn and become the cop I am today, and or I guess before I retired.
So
But
you went and you were a cadet. They put you straight through to the academy.
so I went to the academy in 2003, and again, I was just excited, right? I was so excited for this adventure. And, we were shooting. We had like SWAT night where we go out and learn tactics, and they would CS gas us and laugh at us. And we had to get pepper sprayed, which I kind of had an issue with this because I got pepper sprayed twice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because as cadets, we carried pepper spray because we were in uniform. So they trained us how to use it in some defensive tactics, but we were supposed to have zero suspect contact. So I got pepper sprayed then. It was terrible, as bad as it sounds. I would way rather get tased than pepper sprayed, which I've had both of those things happen, unfortunately. And then I had to do it again in the police academy. Aaron, who was a cadet with me, we actually snuck into the academy. This stuff called I don't remember the company name, but it was wipes that were supposed to counteract pepper spray, and we bought some and we're like, okay, we're gonna sneak over to the bushes after we get pepper sprayed, and we're gonna wipe it off, and then we're just gonna act like it's terrible, and that was our plan. Did not work. It just spread it out across our face. Like it was terrible. But all in all, I mean,
It's
I
karma for sneaking in.
exactly, exactly. That's what we got. That's what we deserved. But we still kind of felt, well, we've been through this before. We were the salty boots in the academy, right?
These
And
little babies.
I was 21. I talk about that all the time. Like as a 21-year-old cop, I would go to houses where, a couple was having a domestic, maybe not even a domestic violence, just a verbal, and I'm sitting there trying to solve their marital problems.
That's what I mean. That's what I was talking about earlier. You're thrown into this at 18, or even if you hire on as a cop without being a cadet, without any kind of preparation for the adult problems that you are going to be called to solve,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And honestly, I look back at that time and I'm lucky that I didn't have a body camera because I was kind of a smartass. I've matured since
Yeah,
then, mostly.
absolutely.
But I look back at those times and it was just such a learning process. Even relationships in the academy. I mean, I was in an academy with, I had a guy that was a special forces Army Ranger who was like 45.
Mhm.
We eventually became friends, but again, me being a 21-year-old smart ass, he took offense to a couple of the jokes that I made. But we actually became really close and we're partners later. But yeah, I mean, it was just such a wild ride in the academy. And then I'm out in field training as a cop. And again, I went to our Southeast Area Command, and it was like, again, I was prepared for defensive tactics. I was prepared to, with my handgun and all of the things that they prepare you tactically and procedurally in the academy. But we really didn't talk about, hey, you're going to see, dead kids, or you're going to see, um, dead bodies, shootings, just horrible things. And you just wipe some dirt on it and keep going. Like, if you talk about it, you're weak. That was kind of the culture then. Um, do remember I had a really salty sergeant. So we have our badge numbers assigned to you when you hire on. So mine was 6928. And that's how long you've been on. So my dad's was 1278. And there was 25 years in between when he hired on and when I hired on. So this salty sergeant I had, his badge number was 900 something. And that's how long he'd been on. His name was Wally. And I remember sitting down with him, and he was my field training sergeant at first, and he treated me very differently. The second I graduated field training, he was like that sergeant you wanted to work for. Took care of you, was very gruff. If you messed up, you heard it. He might chew you out, but then after that, you guys were fine. And I remember he told a story because I got into my first foot pursuit. He showed up, and my adrenaline was spiked. My hands were shaking. Like I caught the guy, but it was first foot pursuit by myself, not with a field training officer. And I don't even remember why the guy ran. I remember where it was at, but I don't remember why. And um, he showed up, and I remember telling him because I was still so like excited. I'm like, "Hey, is this like normal? Like my heart was racing, all that." The guy wasn't. It's not like he had a gun. He's like, "I want to tell you a story." And he's like, I walking into a convenience store to get a Coke in the middle of the night when I was a rookie. And this guy like hired on in the early 70s, like at that point. And he's like, maybe even before that. And there was a robbery in progress. I didn't even see it. The guy ran out. He pulled a gun. He shot at me. I fell down. I shot back, ended up hitting him. And he's like, I literally crapped my pants. And in the moment, I'm like, oh, that's, a crazy story that happened. He got in a shooting. He ended up shooting somebody, and the guy shot at him first. And, obviously a very justified shooting, but I didn't look at that for what it was when he told me the story. Like now, with my experience, that's vulnerability to be able to share like
Mm-hmm.
something like that. That's not something as a cop. That's not how the cops that I generally was around, um, the stuff they talked about. So that was like the one shiny moment that I would say that I had somebody kind of be vulnerable and give me permission to be vulnerable. Um, and then he went back to yelling at me for messing up. That was just Wally. Um,
You got one
I
second.
had 1 second there of vulnerability, but no, I mean, yeah, you're going on these calls. I remember the first, it was a SIDS case, a dead
Yep.
infant, and SIDS stands for sudden infant death syndrome. And you get there and you're panicked and you give CPR and all of those things, and you feel just like that inner turmoil and chaos of what's going on. And no, I'm not physically in danger on a call like that, but it still has an effect on you, like emotionally and adrenaline and cortisol and all of those things that happen to our body. And then you move on to the next one and go home and try and, be normal and
Decompress.
decompress, which I didn't know what that means. I still struggle with decompressing at times, like you force me to go train or do something because that I'm not really
I
great at that.
think I think just for any first responder in general, even doctors in the emergency room, and I think when you are used to or when you learn how to operate at such a high level of stress and cortisol, it's hard to turn around and not feel that. It doesn't feel
Hmm.
normal, right? It feels foreign. So it's, I think, something that first responders and, like I said, in the medical field and emergency services, therapists, people universally that are in these high impact, trauma jobs, turning around and learning how to decompress is not something that's easy, and it's not something that's super common unless you make a very concerted effort
Well, then
to
I'll
do
take it
that.
even a step further. Then what happens is you start to crave that feeling of
Yeah,
that chaos,
absolutely.
and like the you feel alive, the
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline, and then you know, I guess I say decompressing, but debriefing with all your buddies and telling the story again and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. It's like it's very alluring. It's very like you become addicted to that, like anything else. And but the problem is if you start living for that, then everything else goes by the wayside, and you're not taking care of yourself like you should. You're eating at 2 a.m. I worked graveyard for most of my career, and you're eating at 2 a.m. in bars, eating chicken wings and fingers, and you
Mm-hmm.
stop taking care of yourself because, and part of that, the only time you feel alive is when you're out there doing those kind of things. And that took me to, I there was a time I thought I want one of the big reasons also I learned Spanish is I thought I always wanted to be an undercover narcotics cop. Like that, my dad was in narcotics for a long time. And so I grew up on stories of that and all the great things that he did and they did. And that's what I thought I wanted to be until I tried to do it. And then I was an absolute terrible undercover. Like
Mm-hmm.
could not buy dope in a pharmacy. Like every time I tried, we would do vice reversals and I go try to pick up a prostitute and they would laugh at me and say, get lost, cop. Like they all knew I was just absolutely terrible. And I had a senior narcotics cop that I was working with, and I was good at finding CIs or confidential informants and, finding out where the dope was being sold. And he's like, if you keep trying to be an undercover, you're going to get yourself or somebody else hurt. And he again was very straight with me about that. Like, it's not for everybody. Maybe it's not for you.
Well, and for anybody that has played Jackbox TV, that's a game we play with our kids around here. And there's a game where you have to lie. One person's the liar, and then everybody has to try to guess who's lying. And Josh does not succeed at that game. He loses every single time.
A 10-year-old can tell that I'm
So
lying.
I can't imagine you trying to go buy dope if you have the same face that you have during Jackbox.
Yeah, you don't even have to know me to know that I'm lying. You can just tell this guy's not telling the truth. I'm a terrible liar, always have been.
So cadet to failed narcotics detection
Well, I was
undercover.
a good patrol cop, and that was always so. What I would always tell people that wanted to go to any specialized unit, and they come to me because later in my career I actually went to specialized units, and um, I would always say, just be a good patrol cop. Is we can teach you how to do the job, unless it's undercover and it's me. They can't teach me that. But um, like,
You're like that meme with the guy on the skateboard. Oh, what's his with
oh,
the weird eyes?
hello, Steve Buscemi was like, hello,
Yeah.
fellow
Hello,
youths.
fellow youths.
I'd like to purchase some narcotics for a
Yeah.
fee,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah, no, I was terrible. But I was always a good patrol cop, and that's what I would tell you. Just be the best cop you can be, and that will open up other doors, whether it's, leadership, whether it's, if that's what you want to do is promote or go to a specialized unit. And so I was kind of lost in my career, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. But I was always out there as a patrol cop getting into things like people would foot pursuits, vehicle pursuits, back when we were allowed to chase cars before they changed the policy, which I will say isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think chasing somebody for a suspended plate and then they crash into a van and kill a family, like I do agree with restricted pursuit policies, but back then I didn't. I was like, let's go catch him. Um, and I had a canine guy come up to me. And so our canine section, for those who don't know, canine is they go on every foot pursuit, every exciting call, and they use the dog to find people.
Mm-hmm.
So you go find the bad guys. And I had a canine guy tell me, he's like, hey, you should come to canine. And I'm like, I've never really like I grew up around hunting dogs, but that's not really something I ever even thought of. He's like, well, just come out and take the decoy class and see if you like it. And what the decoy class is, they teach you to go to canine. You have to start in the big bite suit and get bit by dogs. And I had never thought about it. He's like, you're a good cop. You're always getting into stuff. Why don't you come out and try it? So I did. I went to the decoy class. I will tell you, as now somebody that has ran a training unit or a training section for a canine unit, trained dozens of dogs and handlers how to do it. Those first times getting bit by a dog it's scary. like like because yeah, I had well back then we mainly just used a bite sleeve and you had like what they call scratch pants, which so the dog's claws don't scratch you, but they can bite you through the scratch pants. So the dog is supposed to bite the sleeve. And I had in my head, what if the dog misses the sleeve? What if the dog bites my foot? What if the dog bites my other arm? Um, Most of the time that didn't happen. Most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
but it's times it did. And but those first couple times, I'll tell you, it was scary. And but I found some of that same like adrenaline rush of this 100-pound police dog that's coming in like a missile is launching and biting you. Um, I found that same adrenaline that I did in policing, and I liked it. Even though it was scary, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get good at this. I'm gonna learn how to like read dogs, and I couldn't at first. They would even like hide you in the dark somewhere, so you couldn't. All you could do is hear the dog coming, and you had the sleeve, and you're thinking in your head, if I can't see any of this, how can the dog know what to bite? Because I know they can smell. It's called apocrine, which is the odor that you put off that when you're afraid. And it's what we think the dogs can differentiate by looking for a bad guy, right? When they're hiding. And I know I was putting off a lot of that. Like I was like, oh my God, you could just hear the claws running across and you're just waiting for the dog to come in. And I'm just like, oh, I can't let them know that I'm scared. So let's just hope he bites what he's supposed to do. And again, most of the time they did. I got a couple boot bites where they run into my foot and bite my foot but for the most part. But I fell in love with it really quick. And then I was donating my time so on my days off, I work graveyard still. So, when I wasn't sleeping, I would donate my time and go out and decoy for the canine section and go pretend to be a bad guy. And they like using new decoys because you put off more of that odor that I was talking about. Um, and so eventually I tested to be a canine officer. Now, I was a field training officer at the time. Um, and, but I tested for our canine section and eventually went as a handler. And it was a ball. Like it's everything again. Everything you wanted to be as a cop, you go to all the fun calls, all the hot calls. You go search for bad guys, and then you know high five and leave. Never thinking about your mental health. Never thinking about, hey, how do I manage going from zero adrenaline to 100 back to zero, back to 100, but throughout a shift for years. Like, it creates that what they call hypervigilance. Even when you're off duty, you're always just like, your nervous system is kind of off, right? And, but you also, you had to learn teamwork. You had to learn how to work, even if you had 4 or 5 handlers to search 3 square miles or a square mile or hundreds of acres of area. How do you do that? How do you work together? How do you communicate? How do you work with other people to get a job done? And there's a lot of nuances to that and communication and things that I learned in that spot. But yeah, my time in K9 was some of the more fun times that I had in my career. You get to hear it because as we drive around Las Vegas, I point out places that I found bad guys, and I have a really bad memory for a variety of reasons. So but you do a great job. You pretend like you hadn't heard it before and act interested, even though I've told you 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
each complex that we walk by.
Yeah. I could probably name most of them at this point.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but
So then after K9,
so I promoted to sergeant.
okay.
So I was in K9 the first time for 4 or 5 years and decided I'm going to be a boss. I want to be a sergeant. And so I studied, and it's funny because it was kind of one of the things my dad always wanted me to do. He's like, you need to promote. You need to promote to sergeant. You need to go. And I I studied. I got promoted. I went to our downtown area command. Um, and like 2 weeks in, I remember thinking, what did I do? Why am I now in charge of babies, baby cops that, they're screwing up. I wouldn't say like bad. It's just like normal new cop stuff. But I was now responsible for 10 other cops to make sure that they didn't. And I was a baby still too, because I hired on so young. I was 28 when I promoted to sergeant.
What age do people normally promote to sergeant? What would you
Well, so
say?
you generally have to have, well, you have to have 7 years at least here in Las Vegas before you can even test to be a sergeant.
Okay.
So, you know,
So if they hire on at 21, they could be 28, but
yeah,
typically they're a little
a
older.
little older. I mean, a lot of people, we get a lot of people that were in the military, have other life experience, which is great, by the way, because I didn't have any of that. Even, having a job, like interacting with people, communicating with people, having relationships and all of that, like going through that gives you that life experience that then to apply as a police officer when you're communicating, when you're talking to people on their worst day, because generally as a cop, when you're talking to someone, it's on their worst day. If you think about it, I mean, how many times have you interacted with police? I mean, I know you were in law enforcement, but when it's not that, it's maybe 1 or 2 times in a lifetime, and it's never a good thing. You're either getting pulled over, which you get pulled over a lot.
I don't.
I can't get you out of tickets anymore either. I'm
It's true.
retired. Um, but you're getting pulled over, which is negative, or you're having a domestic or something along those lines,
Mhm.
and it's always a bad day. And then having that life experience, just having been through some things before you put a badge on, always does help. It's not necessary. I mean, I learned how to talk to people, but um, it definitely helps.
Mhm.
But so most people have a couple jobs, some life experience. So by the time they promote, they're mid 30s, um, and they're able to apply that. And I was still a baby myself.
Yeah.
I had the tactical stuff down because in K9 we do a lot of tactical stuff. Every time the SWAT team went out, 2 of us would go. So I handled barricades and hostage situations and all that when I was in K9 the first time. So like the big stuff, that was easy. But when I had to pull a cop in and talk to him about a bad arrest he made, that was stressful because I hadn't done that before. Like, I all the arrests I was only responsible for me, and all the arrests I made were good. So, but you made a bad arrest. So let's talk about it. Remember my first night as a sergeant, I brought a guy in to talk about because it wasn't a legal arrest, and we had to fix it and had to hold him accountable. And he started crying when I was talking to him because again,
Mhm.
he also had zero life experience in retrospect, and I didn't know how to deal with that. Like I never really had a man crying in front of me like that before over a mistake like that. So it was kind of a trial by fire and learn.
Mhm.
I was a sergeant, and um, I did our, patrol, our problem solving unit, which is like plain clothes, where you're going out solving area neighborhood crime problems. And then I went to our child abuse and neglect section. And I spent 2 years. We investigated all child abuse, all child death, if it was accidental, medical, or abuse related. So, like if a stranger killed a child, the homicide would take it. But if it was like a known suspect, it was abuse related, we would keep it. And so I did that for 2 years, and that job is about as terrible as it sounds. Um, you have throughout throughout the year, you have children die of drownings or medical things or SIDS, like sleep related deaths, or abuse cases that were pretty heinous. And supervising people through those situations was honestly one of the biggest supervisory challenges that I had. Um, and I just, having to deal with those things. And I'll tell you, then I still didn't go talk to a professional. They didn't have anything for us set in place, even though we're dealing with some of the worst calls that you can take. I wasn't, I didn't have tools. Like I wasn't seeing a therapist. We didn't have a department mandated therapy
Well,
for
and
that.
you are only dealing with the most vulnerable,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, because we did
Kids and
elderly as well.
elderly. So you are only seeing the most vulnerable people on the planet being hurt and abused, killed, um, all day, every day for
Hmm.
years.
Yeah.
And your detectives were dealing with that too and working the cases intimately, right?
Yeah, and I saw that as a leader coming out in other ways, meaning the trauma of that. I had detectives with drinking problems. I had detectives with, relationship issues. I had detectives that couldn't get along with each other, and I knew that it was coming from somewhere else. I remember meeting with our peer support. So we had, a police officer that was specially trained to deal with, to communicate with officers when it comes to, traumatic incidents. Basically, the best peer support operates as a pipeline to get officers professional help and employees professional help for what they see. Um, they're not clinicians, they're not anything like that. But I remember meeting with him and I'm like, how do I fix this? And he's like, well, it's just a really hard job. And he's like, we can come in and talk to people. I'm like, okay, I mean, that's a start, but I didn't know what I didn't know at that time either.
Right.
I hadn't done anything for my own mental health. I hadn't been to therapy. I didn't have the experience to apply what I was seeing, but I knew what I was seeing was wrong and we could do things better.
Well, in that job specifically, that section, I think it changes people forever. I think it creates, and I'm not saying one trauma is different or harder than another, but this working with kids and elderly that have been abused and murdered and sexually assaulted, it changes you and it changed you.
Yeah,
It changed
absolutely.
your it kind of changed your belief system
Hmm.
and it it made you into a more hardened person.
Well, yeah, because of instead of leaning into like addressing my own mental health and talking to a professional and learning how to process through the traumatic things that I was seeing daily, I just went internal. Like
Mhm.
I thought that that was tough, I thought that was strength. So generally I would just like not talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
you know among other people that knew in the section, we would talk about it. Like, hey, that was a really hard call. Like, I literally had one of my detectives in a car crying on my shoulder after a call. It was that bad.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know me, I was like, there. Like, I was trying to be what
Yeah.
I knew I needed to in that moment, but really, I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I said earlier. Um, so I did that for 2 years. I was going to test for lieutenant from there. I'm like, I'm going to be a lieutenant. Like, I knew I needed to get out of there. 2 years was enough. 2 years was plenty for that job. And so I know people that did it for decades. And I
Which
just,
they should not be allowed
yeah,
to do a job, well, that specific job for that long. I
no.
mean, it like I said earlier, it changes you. And you and I both have known people and seen people that have worked that job for even a shorter amount of time than 2 years, and it tears you apart.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. I
that's
mean,
my
you,
soapbox.
no,
There should be term limits on abuse neglect.
for sure, or child sex abuse or any
Yes,
of those jobs,
absolutely.
because it does it changes you, and who has the tools to deal with that? I mean, you can be on your mental health journey and you can be seeing a therapist and all that. It's still really hard.
Absolutely.
Um, and I knew I was interviewing a dad that had severely abused his stepson, and I got really angry during the interview, and I walked out of that interview and knew I have to be done
Hmm.
because I was close to, grabbing him across the table, like, and I knew like I'm gonna get myself in trouble because, what have we learned about anger is it's often close. It's one of those emotions that's closest to the surface, right?
Right.
It's usually concealing shame or fear or pain or
Guilt.
guilt. And for me, it was like just the pain of that job for so long that that anger was what was coming out. So I was going to test for lieutenant. I was studying. I had everything, and um, we had two officers get killed, Igor Soldo and Alan Beck. I went to it, even though I was a child abuse detective. I just jumped in my car, grabbed my stuff.
Well, and they didn't, it wasn't just killed, they were executed
Yeah,
in a pizza parlor as they were eating lunch.
yeah. And I was, I knew both of them very well. Alan was on my squad when I was at Southeast as a patrolman for a couple of years, and Igor and I were friends. And so I remember like after that call, and I was studying for lieutenant, I was like, I just am like not ready. I want to be back out there. Like, I think part of it is like, oh, I want to prevent something like this from happening again, or be involved if something like this happens again, and have that impact there. Um, right at that time, there was an opening in K9 as a sergeant, and I told myself I'd never go back because I knew I didn't want to leave the first time, and it'd be that much harder to leave the second time. But I tested and went back as a sergeant,
Mhm.
and it was a great decision again for me. Like I was there for another 4 or 5 years, and I I went from that baby sergeant, but I was a sergeant for so long because I
Mhm.
went back there that by the time I promoted, I did have the life experience then to apply it in other positions as a lieutenant or captain and beyond. Whereas before, I would have just been that guy that just kept promoting and didn't have the tactical experience. I hadn't experienced a lot to put myself and be empathetic to officers that were going through things because these, sometimes these people that just are on that track to promote as soon as they can, especially when they're young, they lose that connection with other cops because it comes across like you're just there for yourself, just to promote, don't have the time or the experience to be in the position you're at, like to earn it basically. And so I spent a long time in K9. Was partnered with my partner Loki. I had a bunch of different dogs on my years in K9, but Loki, he was my partner. And
You could honestly, we could do a whole episode on Loki and
yeah,
his antics because
yeah,
the stories, when the whole SWAT team is afraid of a dog,
right.
like, but
He never bit any of them, just for the
no,
record. But
no,
he was just
he was crazy.
he was crazy. He was just very enthusiastic about doing his job.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
good police dog.
he was a good police dog, and some of that's the history of him. Like he was at a bunch of different agencies. He would get so excited that he would bite his handler, but it really wasn't out of rank, is what they call like a dog that he wasn't questioning the authority. It was just like, this is awesome, and bite you. And so him and I ended up being a good match because I didn't tend to get my blood up on tactical stuff like that. So I always knew when it was going to happen, and I could just like move the leash away from me before he turned to bite me, and then he'd realize and then go back towards the bad guy. So um, yeah, I do. In fact, I think we should do a whole episode on Loki.
Yeah,
I would
let's do
love to
it.
talk about
It's
him.
our podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Exactly. Episode 2 is going to be Loki. We'll see. Maybe not that, um, but yeah. And then obviously my time in Canine, it was very eventful. I had some very big calls, and I think that I was able to apply my experience both as a handler and both as somebody that was a sergeant in a couple different sections too. I didn't just go right back to K9 either, so I had to go back and supervise some of my peers that I was in K9 with, but I'd been a sergeant for 4 years at this point, and I'd worked in abuse, neglect, and the problem solving unit and all of that, and I came back a different human than I was when I left,
Mhm.
and that really helped me out, and to be able to help move that section in a direction that I felt it needed to be moved in as a leader that was there. Um, and really just on top of everything else, and it was fun.
Yeah.
And but it was there that, like I said, I responded to the Route 91 Festival massacre, which, you know, knowing what it was, and you had 58 people killed, like I said at the beginning. It was because I was in that position as a K9 sergeant to go to that and have an impact.
Yeah. So, and we're going to do a whole episode on that
Mhm.
story alone. So, after being a sergeant in K9, where did you go?
So I promoted to lieutenant, and I went directly to, I was an administrative lieutenant in charge of the detectives at Spring Valley Area Command. And so, as somebody that was operational and tactical for almost my entire career, now is in charge of coming up with a strategy to fight crime in a geographical area of Las Vegas. And man, detectives I knew because I was there, and our detectives at the area, they handled a little bit of everything that are assigned to that area. So that part wasn't as bad, but like I didn't know anything about crime analytics or how to come up with a crime plan other than what I studied to test for lieutenant. And that's where I met a analytical manager that I asked to help me out with a couple of things.
Yes. And he asked very nicely.
I would like to think that I was just professional when I walked into your office and asked you
Absolutely.
for help.
Yes.
I think you tell that story a little better than I do.
Um, he just walked into my office. I was managing 12 crime analysts at the time, and we were in charge of all of the statistical data for the department. And he came in with our stat report and put it on my desk and said, I need a report on this, this, this. And I did not know this man. And I just said, well, I don't know who you are. So you're going to have to turn around and walk out of my office and then walk back in and try asking me nicely. And he did.
I did. Although at that point in my career, I was very used to just telling people what they needed to do and then telling me, okay, boss, and then they would do it.
Yeah,
But
it's not how I operated.
it definitely was not. I did come back in and I asked very nicely,
He did.
and you helped me come up with some strategies because I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was actually very successful as an administrative lieutenant because I had my silent partner, a crime analytics manager that I asked very nicely to help me the second time.
Yes.
Um, so as a lieutenant, I was at our Spring Valley Area Command. I went to the Strip, which I had avoided my entire career, which is the Las Vegas Boulevard. I There is more to Las Vegas than the Strip, than all the casinos and hotels and all of that. There's a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So I would rather be in the neighborhoods and the different areas of Vegas than that. But I went there as a lieutenant and was the admin lieutenant over there. Um, and that was a whole different world, a whole different style of policing. Um, until I was, I'm going to say, quote unquote, asked to go to our internal affairs section investigating, misconduct on police officers. And when I say asked, I meant I was told that's where I needed to go. And so I went to our internal affairs section, was there for 2 years, investigated, you know, a lot of cops that were doing the right thing, and cleared them because you had somebody that made a report that maybe wasn't exactly factual, and then I investigated cops that didn't do the right thing. Sometimes because they couldn't regulate their emotions. Most of the complaints we got were not knowing how to talk to people or not talking to people well. It's called interaction with the public. That you can arrest somebody and take their freedom away. You can use force on somebody, but if you call them an asshole, that's going to be the complaint. And so there was a lot of that. And then I had some really large cases involving some pretty severe misconduct. Um, so I did that for 2 years until I decided, you know what? I really like not being a cop and being an administrator. So I decided to test for captain.
And yeah, you really liked being on call. 24/7 and not
Well,
sleeping. So,
I was on call. Yeah, I was on call for a lot of my career. In canine, the call was different. Like, I'd be in bed, my phone would ring. We need a dog here. Okay, I'd sleepily wake up, throw on my uniform, go wake my dog up. Let's go. We go search for the bad guy, and then I go home. I got paid for 4 hours. Rarely took that, except unless it was like a barricade or hostage thing that took like 12, 13, 14 hours. But for the most part, it was that. But then when I was in internal affairs, you get called out for stuff. But then when I was a captain, it was a whole different ball game.
mhm.
Because when they promoted me, I went to the our convention center area command, which is the Las Vegas Strip, and I was the captain over the Strip. Which, they say it's the city that never sleeps. Neither did I, because I still had all the duties of a captain during the day and meetings and crime fighting meetings and you know action, which is our comp stat, and um, everything I had to do during the day. But then Vegas, turned on at night and my phone would ring. And I mean, you had to deal with that. How many times I would literally lay in bed with my phone and on vibrate on my chest because I knew something was happening. So I didn't wake you up.
Mhm.
And
Go in the closet.
going, I did. I was in the closet on the phone a lot of times, like,
Mhm.
what's going on?
Mhm.
Um, and so I did that for a couple of years, and it was an experience. I'll say that because you were there along for the ride on that one.
It was.
Um, and then when the new sheriff got elected, he called me and he's like, "Hey, I want you to move and create a wellness bureau for the police department." And I was like, "Why me?"
Mhm.
Because again, not something that I had, um, you know, really put energy into in my entire career. And he's like, "Well, you've been through a lot and you handled it really well." And the truth is I didn't handle any of it well or otherwise. Um, and throughout this podcast, like I said, we keep it light, not always talking about, trauma and traumatic incidents, but in a very short period of time, I had the Route 91 massacre. I had officer involved shooting 5 weeks later. I had a father die of cancer, my dad that I was talking about earlier in the podcast. I had a brother take his own life. Um, and I had all of these things that happened. And the truth is, I didn't deal with any of it. So I was asked to create this bureau that focused on how to get cops to do what I didn't do. And I had no idea how to do that. Now, at this point in my life, I was in therapy, um, working on my own trauma and mental health, which was, as everybody knows, a journey. But it was an experience, and I learned a lot. It was actually really good for me to be part of that because when you're learning about something and for other people, you're also learning about it for yourself. And I'm proud of some of the things that we were able to do there and creating that wellness bureau. It's still, and through my retirement, it's still kicking. Um, but it's always something that can be better and it's something that can be improved on. And I say this when we talk about mental health is it's not just for cops or first responders, or it really is everybody, because there's this word stigma when it comes to mental health and law enforcement. There's a stigma. Police officers don't want to get help. People don't want to get help. Men don't want to go sit down and talk with a therapist and talk through their problems. So a lot of what we're going to talk about in upcoming episodes in this podcast is applicable to anybody. You don't have to be a cop. You don't have to be a firefighter. You don't have to be any in that first responder role to, you know, learn from what I've been through, what you've been through, professionally and personally. Like, you don't have to have that same position to learn how to start your own journey. And I think that's really what, this podcast and the episodes that we're going to do um, coming up is how can we, using our experience, using what I'm writing about and or wrote about in my book, um, and what I've been lucky enough to go around the country and speak on to police officers and normal folks and people in business and all these different audiences that I've been able to tell my story to, but also talk about, resilience and my own journey with mental health and how to navigate the hard emotions that come along with that, how to navigate fear and anxiety and tactical paralysis and, freezing when things get hard. And I'm excited to be able to then expand that in our audience through our podcast.
Mhm.
And I think that, in the next episode, I'm going to talk about 1 October, my story, my experience, what happened on that event, and give people an idea of what it was, not only what happened, but what it was like, what it felt like to be there and what it felt like to go through it. And even talk about, some of the mistakes that I made, not only tactically, which, there's very few tactical operations that go 100%, none go 100% right every time, but also the aftermath and what I did poorly and how I didn't deal with things. And because I think a big part of this and, our business and what we do is I don't want people to make the same mistakes that I made. And, if you can learn from my mistakes so you don't have to do that when it regards to your own mental health, then you'll be that much better for it. You'll be that much more prepared when something does happen in your life.
Well,
Because
oh, sorry.
I was going to say, because what I taught, it's not just professional. I had a lot of personal loss too.
Mhm.
And we all, as you get older, you start to have those things happen. And a lot of people younger too have those things happen. So hopefully through my experience and your experiences, we can help people.
And I was just going to say that it's one thing to get up in front of a group of people and talk about trauma and leadership, and that's there are many people that do that, and I think that's great and it's very much needed. But I do think something that you offer that is special and unique to you is that you have been through very extreme, difficult, critical incidents that no other human being on the planet can say that they've been a part of. So, yes, there were other officers that were involved in Route 91, but only a handful of them got together a team and walked that team up to the 32nd floor to breach the suspect's door. And only one person on this planet can say they were an incident commander over a shooting on the campus here in Las Vegas at UNLV, and also the incident commander over a mass stabbing attack on the strip. I mean, you have been through things not only that most people haven't, but that most cops haven't. And so that is saying something that you are able to come out and come at trauma and policing and leadership and all of these different facets. You're able to come at it from a very unique perspective because you have been there, you have lived it, and there are a lot of people in that haven't. And so I think that's really important as people listen and learn more about you, that you have been through some hard shit and you've been through shit that no one else on the planet has been through. And so I'm allowed to say that as the co-host. I'm allowed to hype you up, and because I want people to understand that, because that's really an important part of this too.
Well, I appreciate that. And also to give you kudos is I wouldn't be able to do any of that if it wasn't for you supporting me, whether it's in a podcast or in life. So, um, talking me into go to therapy, talking me into, continually working on myself. And I think there will be episodes where we talk about that, where we
Yeah.
get vulnerable about, some of my lowest moments and that you helped me through um, and that what you experienced, because just because you helped me through doesn't mean it wasn't hard on you either. So, and I think that's where we're going to end this episode today. Our next episode, I'm going to go through the 1 October shooting and my own experience, and maybe even a couple lessons on how that applies to life.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us today on the Courage to Live podcast, and we will see you next time.